around, pointed at a prisoner, and yelled some German which nobody understood, and I was to interrogate, and the poor fellow, of course, he didn't know anybody except the name of his sergeant. But Colonel insisted that I would ask him about, well, to go to extremes, who invented the 88 cannon or something, some crazy stuff like that. That was typical of American army officers. They didn't really know just how much information they can expect from the average German soldiers. They never expected any information or any knowledge out of an American soldier. He was supposed to not know anything for security reasons, but they expected the Germans to know, which of course didn't make sense. So the interrogators had a hard time to get along, get information, at the same time satisfy the officers with their way of getting it. Was interesting. Interrogating prisoners, and then when we took a town, trying to establish some sort of a civil government among the remaining civilians there, and kept on going until finally that part of the war was finished. And then we went on down to a town in France, and in a rest area. And that's where that was in, by now it was March, and in the rest area our mail caught up with us. I had 4 or 5 Christmas packages, a lot of mail. We got all our whiskey and wine rations. We had a wonderful time, but it lasted only 3 or 4 days. And then we were attached to the French army in the Colmar area, and our unit, together with the French, liberated that area around Colmar. And as a result, in my personnel file is mentioned that I am authorized to wear the coat of arms of the city of Colmar. At that time, it sounded good, but nobody knew what the coat of arms of the city of Colmar looked like. And it wasn't until many, many years later, in 1974 or 5, when I was on a visit in Paris, that I happened to see the Colmar coat of arms on a beer truck. I made a copy of it, and now I finally know what the coat of arms of the city of Colmar looks like. Well, this is about the end of this tape. Well, these are memories of World War II. There may be some repetition with the previous reel. I don't know exactly where I stopped, but indications are that I stopped in 1943. And I probably mentioned that I was stationed at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. That was the main aviation laboratory and test point of the Army Air Force. During World War II, there was no separate Air Force. It was a part of the U.S. Army. And I believe I mentioned some of the main projects I worked on were the radio noise eliminators, which are still being used today in the 70s. They are the foot-long tubes containing glycol or anything, a non-freeze liquid, and a wick to provide fine discharge points for static electricity from the wings of aircraft. It's generally used only on large aircraft, but nowadays, of course, practically all the aircraft is very large, so it's used quite extensively today. And then another project I worked on was the LORAN navigation aids. That is another system that was developed during World War II and has been continuously improved, and I believe it's still being used all over the world. My stay at Wright Field was very interesting. I didn't like Dayton, Ohio so much because during wartime living conditions were not any too pleasant, but when I had a chance to live out at the field, aid in the officers' club, for exercise I would go playing golf, the only time in my life I ever played golf. Or I would get a canoe and canoe on the Miami River. And of course I put in long hours at Air Service Commander Wright Field. It was more or less a hobby. It was very interesting. Until, of course, D-Day. Prior to D-Day, it was always agreed, that is, when I went into the service, they more or less implied that I would never be sent to Europe. if I should ever go into the war zone, it would be in the South Pacific, which was fine. But came D-Day, and a few days afterwards, I had orders to report to a military intelligence field, Camp Ritchie, near Baltimore, Maryland. At least I had to go to Baltimore to get there. I found out it was much closer to Washington, D.C. So I got there, not knowing what I was getting into. A civilian on the train asked me where I was going. I told him I'm going to a place called Camp Ritchie. He said, "Oh, that's a secret place." Well, that's the first thing I knew, that it was a security place. So we went there, and the living conditions and food, everything was excellent, but we went through a very intense training program in intelligence fields. We had to learn all about all the other armies, enemy armies and friendly armies, and we had to learn interrogation procedures, counterintelligence procedures. We had to learn close combat. At that time they called it jiu-jitsu. Karate wasn't known then, but it was the same. Anyway, close combat, or how to immobilize an enemy. Some of it I couldn't even take seriously. In fact, so much so that I got a very poor grade on one of the maneuvers we went on when we were to take a house early in the morning. House supposedly was occupied by enemy forces, and I just walked right up to it as if it was just an little country place. And of course I was supposed to carefully organize the men to surround the place and go through all that cloak and dagger stuff. And I just, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I just couldn't take it seriously. But anyway, some of it I took seriously, and I learned and passed, of course. And then the next thing, I found myself at Camp Kilmer in, I believe it's New Jersey. And a few days after that, found myself with my duffel bag and everything on a dock down at the Hudson River. I don't know whether it was in New York or New Jersey. And the Red Cross passed out coffee and donuts. And then we went aboard ship on the way to Europe. The ship was a British liner, had been used for, I would call it, tourist business or tourist trade, very nicely arranged, except cabins which were designed for 2 were now being used by 4 officers, and the enlisted men slept 3 high in 2 shifts. We got 2 meals and all the rigmarole that goes with going overseas in wartime. Like we had our life preservers with a red light attached to it, battery operated, in case we should get into the water and float around. That light would more or less direct possible rescue boats to pick us up. Well, we got over into Scotland, Glasgow, without any accident. The whole convoy got there. And it was raining. They tell me it usually is raining in Glasgow. It was kind of a dirty place. Went off the ship. We were marched to the railroad, locked into the railroad. All the windows were blacked out. And then the next thing, the train started going south. Could only go south as far as I know. Red Cross came in again, handed out take-off cards and sewing kits to be used overseas. I still have mine. Had a few buttons, a few needles and some cotton thread, and a pair of scissors, small scissors. Everything necessary to put on a button or saw some little hole in the clothes that may happen. And after quite a long ride, we came to Birmingham. Got out and got onto buses that took us to, I believe they called it Litchfield. It was a bunch of tenement houses set aside for army use. Typical poor construction, but it was brick, outdoor plumbing. Each room had a tiny little fireplace. It was cold at night and wet, and we always wanted more heat than we could get. We would get a bucket of coal, and that little fireplace, we had to get that coal to give us some heat. We had warm water, not hot, warm water, once a week to take a bath or a shower. I think it was a bath. They didn't have any showers there. The food, well, you couldn't expect very much in England. The people were very pleasant. And not far away there was a bar or a pub. We would spend a lot of the time there. I think we were there for probably 2 weeks, getting ready for our next assignment on the continent. Time went fast. I did have a chance to do a little sightseeing in London and around Birmingham, Stratford-on-Avon, and places like that. Had a good time in a way. But time went fast, and next thing we went by jeep down to the coast. I don't know whether it was Portsmouth or where we went. No names shown any place. And every time, wherever we came to a town, they had tank traps or whatever they could do, just in case the Germans should ever try to make a landing. So we got down there, took on a good supply of gasoline in our jeep, ran up a LST on our way across the channel. Got the US Navy ran the LST. They really gave us one real delicious good meal there, and officers were allowed to run up the ship. I managed to get up to the bridge to see how the radar works. After all, that was still my field. I thought I would still be called to do some more radar work. And it was interesting to go across there, and we get near Cherbourg, saw the port of Cherbourg, and all the sunken ships there. Landed on the beach, drove off in our jeeps, and followed the guide who took us on straight on down to Paris. I don't quite remember how long it took us, but I think we made it in one day and got there late at night. Some suburb of Paris, WWII. The Germans had just been kicked out very recently, was a matter of days, and we took over where they had been. It was really, that WWII was the intelligence camp. All the intelligence teams went to that place to be assigned to the different army organizations, like army headquarters or divisions, units. In a matter of a few days, we got all our equipment. Our team was organized. There were, to start out with, 2 officers. I was one, then I had a second lieutenant with me, and we had a master sergeant, tech sergeant, and 4 corporal and privates. And they all were linguists. They all spoke French or German or Italian, and they all were quite intelligent men, but they all were oddballs in a way too. Of course, I shouldn't say anything. Probably they called me an oddball. So there we in Paris, I think we had 3 or 4 days again. Everything was just a few days, but we made the best of it and went into Paris sightseeing. Didn't see very much. The Germans didn't leave too good an impression, and the French were naturally very glad to see us there and tried to give us as much as they could in the way of what they had, refreshments, sour wine and bread, but the overall atmosphere was somewhat depressing. Paris, however, is all